John, what struck you the most about that news conference today?
Well, David, I have to say what struck me the most is President Barchi's words that this was a failure of process. He didn't use the word leadership, and I think a lot of people would have inserted that word, that it was a failure of leadership that ultimately led to Tim Pernetti's resignation here at Rutgers this morning. The president went on to say that he is deeply sorry. He apologized to the student athletes here at Rutgers. He apologized to members of the LGBT community because, of course, as we now know, that video contains clips where Mike Rice used gay slurs in practice. His most trusted assistant, Jimmy Martelli, also used gay slurs in practice. The president made it clear in the press conference today that even though he did not watch the tape late last year, he was made aware of the fact that a homophobic slur, or homophobic language, I should say, was part of the tape, which begs the question, why, when you heard that, did you not take the additional step to seek out the video? And it was very interesting to me that he acknowledged that the first time he saw the video wasn't at home, wasn't in his office, it was in the presence of Tim Pernetti. And he said it was at that time that he realized he had such a fundamental difference with Pernetti about what was on those tapes. And it was at that time, he said, that he knew that not only Coach Rice had to go, he fired him the next morning, but that Tim Pernetti very likely also had to go. Let's listen in now to some of the other comments from President Robert Barchi at the press conference just a few moments ago.
Tim and I mutually agreed that this is in the best interest of Rutgers. I appreciate the positive things that Tim has done for the university, but I also recognize the gravity of recent developments in regard to the men's basketball program. Now, let me begin by saying that this was a failure of process. I regret that I did not ask to see the video when Tim first told me of its existence, because I am certain that this situation would have had a very different outcome had I done so. So I want to personally apologize to the entire Rutgers community, our faculty, our staff, our students, our parents, our alumni, and the many others who support the great work of this university. As Tim acknowledged Wednesday, his decision to rehabilitate rather than fire Coach Rice was wrong. While I applaud Tim for his frank self-assessment, it is clear to me and to everyone who has seen this video recently just how egregious the offenses were and how out of keeping with the Rutgers community's values they were. This mutual decision is in the best interest of Rutgers, and we will learn from this situation going forward. I respect and accept Tim's decision to step down, and I sincerely wish him well.
Now, the big question in a lot of people's minds, what is the status of President Robert Barchi? Is his job safe? He addressed that today in a rather good-humored fashion, saying that he wakes up every day not knowing if he'll have to resign. But all kidding aside, you know, there are some serious questions about whether he should remain here as the head of Rutgers University. Also at the press conference today, the chair of the Board of Governors, Ralph Izzo, he made a very emphatic show of support for his president. It was difficult to gauge from Chairman Izzo the extent to which the remainder of the Board of Governors feel the same way. Izzo also revealed today that certain members of the Board of Governors were made aware of the investigation of Mike Rice's behavior late last year, but he said that he can't recall that it was ever brought up in front of the full board. Something else that the university has done here today, and I've yet to have an opportunity to go through it in detail, but they've released what looks to be about a 50-page report. Remember, in late November, when former assistant Eric Murdoch came to athletic director Tim Pernetti with the videotapes of the abusive behavior in practice, it was at that time that Pernetti consulted with university attorneys, and they hired an outside investigator. This is the results of that investigation. We're told it's heavily redacted. It doesn't include student names, student-athlete names, but we'll be curious to see what's in that report, and I'm sure it will be parsed very carefully in the days moving forward. David?
John, if I could boil this down, it sounds like Pernetti wanted to fire Mike Rice. He was prevented doing so from the lawyers and perhaps some members of the board. His hands are tied and he gets fired. Is that basically how this went down in your estimation?
I think that's what he said in his letter of resignation. In fact, there was a very interesting line in the letter of resignation where, and I'm paraphrasing, he said after hearing from all of the people involved, the council and the outside investigator, the consensus was that university policy prevented dismissal. And I asked the president, I said, under what university policy can a head coach use a gay slur against a student athlete and still keep his job? You know, a lot of schools have zero tolerance policies when it comes to that type of language. So I think, you know, everything is being said in the written word, presented in the written fashion, I should say, through the prism of what's legally correct. But there are moral and ethical questions as well, and those are the more difficult ones to answer. And I think the president had a tough time answering them today.
It's worth noting the general counsel, John Wolfe, as the president mentioned, President Barchi, has resigned because of his role in all of this. As you mentioned, Ralph Izzo basically gave, you know, his thumbs up, his approval of Robert Barchi continuing on as the president at Rutgers. We've heard that, you know, state politicians have gotten involved in this. Where does it go from here? Is that the end of the matter?
Well, you're quite right. There are state lawmakers who have called for an investigation. They want to know more about the decision-making behind the scenes. You know, why the decision was only made to suspend Mike Rice. You know, one of the questions that we didn't have an opportunity to ask President Barchi, because frankly we'd asked a number of them and we were sort of cut off, is, you know, when you became aware of more of the details, you know, why weren't more people shown this video? Why did more people not weigh in? You know, it's just, it continues to be remarkable to me that President Barchi saw this videotape in the presence of his athletic director and knew immediately what to do. He knew that Coach Rice had to be fired. He said those words himself today. So why didn't Tim Pernetti know that? You know, President Barchi acknowledged that Tim Pernetti's a stand-up guy. He said he's a very honest guy, and he's clearly was effective as an athletic director in terms of helping to get the school into the Big Ten. But was his moral compass so skewed that he didn't understand when he saw it for the first time that just wouldn't fly? You know, look, let's get something clear. If Tim Pernetti wanted to fire Mike Rice after seeing that video, he could have. He absolutely could have, and I don't think anybody would disagree with that statement. In his letter, he is mentioning that university policy prevented his dismissal, but I think there are going to be a lot of people who just don't buy that, frankly.